Look, I mentioned last week the state of political play in Victoria. By any reckoning, it is staggering. We learnt at the end of last month that Daniel Andrews had been called before the Anti-Corruption Commission. Once the media found out, he was asked whether he led a corrupt and unethical government. Now, remember the red shirts before the 2014 election? Taxpayers' money was used to pay staff whose role was to help secure the election of the Andrews government. The Victorian ALP was forced to repay $388,000. Mr Andrews was asked if that was evidence of an unethical pattern. He denied it. But the anti-corruption report ostensibly found, as I indicated to you last week, that it is, quote, highly likely the misuse of publicly funded staff and the employment of family members and factional allies for party or factional purposes and nepotism has occurred for a much longer period and is much more widespread across Labor. And he went on. Crime and Corruption Commission said these unethical practices are embedded within the Victorian Labor branch and are systemic to all the factions. Well, 3 weeks later, Victorians went to the polls. Victorian Labor won 24 seats, and with the exception of 7, there were significant swings to Labor. Shouldn't Victorians be shaking their heads? We learned today, not for the first time, the Andrews government is trying to keep information from Victorians that they're entitled to have. In a landmark freedom of information victory for the Australian newspaper, the Victorian Information Commissioner has ordered that documents related to secret COVID-19 surveys of Victorians conducted by Premier Andrews' taxpayer-funded $2 million political strategist, that the information from these surveys done for Daniel Andrews' private use, secret surveys, the documents be handed over. Now, I repeat, these surveys were funded by the Victorian taxpayer, but Daniel Andrews doesn't want the public to know. He was using your money to determine the attitudes to his government and the handling of the pandemic, especially the world record-breaking and crushing lockdowns. The Information Commissioner said there was, quote, a public interest in disclosure regarding the expenditure of public funds, unquote. This was particularly strong, he said, quote, where such funds are spent by the government on surveying attitudes on issues of significance to the community, unquote. Well, don't worry, Daniel Andrews won't yield to that. The Andrews government is spending more public money, taxpayers' money, appealing the ruling by the Information Commissioner. If he's successful, the surveys will be kept under wraps. This just brings us back to the red shirts wrought in 2014 and the Andrews government's love affair with secrecy. Remember, we had private security guards without proper training overseeing the Andrews government's bungled coronavirus hotel quarantine scheme. There was an inquiry, but we still don't know who was responsible for engaging private security.